Prepare to be captivated by the business story of the week, hosted by me, Shaheen Shan. Join us on a journey through the twists and turns of entrepreneurial triumphs and setbacks. Immerse yourself in the narrative and witness the magic that turns dreams into reality. This is Business Story of the Week.
And welcome back once again, ladies and gentlemen. We are back here in Business Story of the Week. I am your host, Joshua. And today, like we always do, we navigate the world of entrepreneurship, business, and innovation. And today, we have ourselves quite the innovator and the leading voice in a very particularly advancing, or rather, field that more people need to know, more people need to hear about this. Benjamin Lightburn is a proven entrepreneur and leader specializing in the research, development, and commercialization of novel extraction technologies. He is currently applying this experience to the development of natural psychedelic medicines as CEO and co-founder of Filament Health, a natural psychedelic drug development company. Filament is the first company to enter psychedelic drugs developed directly from natural sources like plants and fungi into clinical trials. Prior to this, all studies of psychedelics have been done on synthetic manufactured products. Filament is studying its mushroom-based psilocybin as a treatment for substance use disorders like opioids and stimulant use disorder, and more than a dozen other companies and academic centers around the world are using the company's drugs in trials of depression, chronic pain, and other disorders. Ben, this is really something that is particularly interesting to me, as something that I've dabbled with as well. But before we get into it, thank you for being here. How are you doing? Thank you for being here.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure. I'm doing very well, thanks.
Fantastic, Ben. You've quite, I believe you've done a lot of advances, or you've done quite a lot of work now surrounding the natural psychedelic field and psychedelic field in general, I would say. But before we get into that, I always like to start from the beginning. I always like to start it the way I do, from where it all began. First of all, Ben, what is your story? Where did you find the inspiration to get into psychedelics? And was there anything that happened particularly maybe in your childhood life, maybe your family background? What is the story of Ben Lightburn?
Well, I guess there's kind of two stories. There's how did I get into botanical extraction, and then also how did I get into psychedelics? Because they're
All right,
a little bit
please.
different, but they're now very closely related, obviously.
Mhm.
The story of how I got into botanical extraction is essentially just kind of like by coincidence. I was in university, I was getting a degree in physics, and I was looking for a summer job, and I happened to get in touch with a guy who had a startup company dedicated to the commercialization of a novel extraction technology known as microwave
Mhm.
assisted solvent extraction.
Wow,
And I had a
microwave.
summer job in his lab as well, and eventually started working there after graduation. And
Mhm.
we learned all about how to extract new cancer drugs from plant sources. And it was very, very interesting to me.
Okay.
I sort of always known that, certain drugs come from natural sources, but I didn't really know how the sausage was made. And at this company, I learned a lot about different kinds of biomass, different kinds of extraction ratios, different solvents, all the kind of nuts and bolts of how do you actually do extraction.
Mhm.
From that company, I moved to a different company where we were focused more on ingredients for the supplement industry, the cosmetics industry,
Mhm.
the food and beverage industry, the pharma industry.
Mhm.
At that company, I eventually became CEO. We raised a fair amount of angel and venture capital money, and we sold the
Mhm.
company in the
Right.
in the summer of 2018. And this really gave the experience of how to build a company, how to make a team, how
Right.
to raise money, how to go through an exit, all these kinds of things, a little bit more one step removed from the actual making of the botanical extracts. And so
Right.
if you think back to 2018, the
Mhm.
psychedelics industry is really just kind of getting started or having its
Yeah.
renaissance, I guess, one of its
Yes.
many beginnings.
Yes.
And we had just, myself and my team from this recently exited company, we were kind of looking around for a new project.
Right.
And the thing that struck us about psychedelics, first and
Mhm.
foremost, was the ability to make products that have the potential to help so many people, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
In our previous company, we've been making, dietary supplement ingredients like green
Mhm.
tea extract and blueberry extract, and
Mhm.
this is great. And we were making them with an environmentally friendly process, and they were being
Mhm.
sold for supplements for new mothers and things like that. It's great,
Mhm.
but it's not like psychedelics, right? Psychedelics,
Right.
you have this huge opportunity to make products
Mhm.
that can affect the lives of probably at the end of the day every single person on this planet,
Right.
by treating some of the most intractable and serious concerns that we're dealing with
Mhm.
all
Mhm.
across societies, all around
Yeah.
the world. In addition, what was crying out to us was the need for somebody with the skills and experience to make these products naturally,
Right.
because at the time all clinical research had been done with synthetically manufactured psychedelic drugs.
Right.
And there's nothing really wrong with synthetic psychedelic
Of
drugs.
course.
They're being
Mhm.
shown to be safe and effective. But it's
Right.
important to remember that humanity has been using psychedelics for thousands of years. And
Right.
only in the last few decades have there been synthetic psychedelics,
Synthetics.
right?
Mhm.
The historical connection to all of these substances, by and large, is through a naturally manufactured substance. And many
Yes.
people prefer natural substances in all
Mhm.
areas of their life, right? Like people aren't asking for more synthetic food coloring
Yes.
or synthetic flavor products or more
Mhm.
synthetic toothpaste, right? The trend is to more
Yes.
natural ingredients. And so
Yes.
we thought that it would be very important for the eventual psychedelics market to at least have the option of a natural product as opposed to a synthetic
Right.
product. And obviously we
Mhm.
had all of the necessary skills and expertise, not just in manufacturing, but also in company building and all that kind of stuff. So it
Yes.
was a kind of a it was almost like a blindingly obvious thing that we couldn't avoid. It was like you have the
Yes.
ability to make products that can help millions of people, something that's using all of your experience perfectly in a
Mhm.
large gaping hole in a new and growing market to fill with
Right.
natural products.
Mhm. But that's now okay. So you got into botanical extraction, and you what was this method called? Microwave assisted.
Yeah, microwave assisted solvent extraction. So this was
Wow.
way back. This is 3 companies ago.
Wow, that's crazy. So the method existed years ago, and then you encountered this. You got into the psychedelics, and you got into this field of natural psychedelic extraction, basically. And now you have Filament Health, which is basically innovating psychedelic medicine because you guys are doing it in a natural way. Um, you mentioned I like to highlight this a bit. You mentioned the psychedelic renaissance of 2018 because, um, of course, we all know the hippie era where this advent, so to speak, of psychedelics really started getting into the mainstream. Going from that, from the mindset back then in that era to this renaissance now, to me, it feels like now is when we are really starting to look at its health benefits. Back then, it was more it feels more like it was recreational. Of course, there was nothing wrong with that, right? It was, it's the advent. Everyone was enjoying it. There was peace, there was love everywhere. Everyone was enjoying. But now we're seeing its medical benefits. What are the things that you saw that coming from that era to now, especially coming into the natural psychedelics, because back then that era was also like LSD, which is synthetic, right? One of the more popular ones back then. What were the challenges and breakthroughs that you saw different from both time frames, especially now approaching a more natural approach to psychedelics?
So, although LSD is predominantly, obviously, manufactured synthetically, it was discovered on a
Mhm.
fungus. It is an actual natural product as well, even though
Yes.
it is
Oh, right.
by far and away manufactured synthetically. Um,
Right. Okay.
I think probably the biggest differences between the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s,
Yep.
and today in terms of the psychedelic industry are the
Mhm.
rigor of the clinical trials that are being conducted,
Right.
and also that rather than psychedelics being promoted as a recreational market, as you say, the majority of the psychedelics, at least the legal psychedelics market these days,
Hmm.
the majority
Hmm.
of it is focused on a therapeutic market, not a recreational market,
Yes.
right? So we're talking
Yes.
about treating um, diseases with FDA approved drugs, right? Rather
Yes,
than
for sure.
making new recreational substances. People are
Hmm.
always going to take recreational psychedelics, and in fact, that's
Hmm.
growing in popularity very, very
Also.
fast. But
Hmm.
for the foreseeable future, that will all remain illegal. Even
Yeah.
though many people would probably prefer that it would be legal, so that the consumers can enjoy some kind of
Of
a
course.
regulated, safer supply than what they
Hmm.
currently enjoy, which is completely unregulated products that in a certain kind of ironic twist, they kind of appear that they're legal, but they're actually not illegal. They're not legal,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We're talking about like chocolates and gummies and capsules and things that have packaging that makes them look as though they're legal, but they're definitely not.
Mhm.
Um, so that would be, I think, the biggest difference is that most of what the focus on now is on FDA approved clinical trials
Mhm.
investigating the efficacy for hardcore diseases, like in our case
Yes.
substance use disorders, right?
Yep.
We
Mhm.
are looking to treat opioid addiction and
Mhm.
stimulant addiction and
Mhm.
depression and PTSD and
Yes.
all these different kinds of
Yep.
things, which they were trying to do as well back in the 50s and
Yep.
60s, but the clinical trials at that time did not enjoy the same rigorous
True.
standards that we have today.
Right. So I want to highlight on that clinical trials because this is important to, an important perspective for the audiences who probably are not as exposed because, like when there's still some sort of stigma that is stuck with psychedelics, but when we start connecting that there are rigorous clinical trials surrounding it, then maybe we'd start feel safer about it.
Yeah.
But tell me about that, Ben, in the sense that it is still illegal, like you said. It looks legal, maybe, because we're starting to do clinical trials, but it's the bottom line, it's still illegal. That seems to be the biggest challenge right now. Yeah, sure. It's nice to hear that to hear the news that wow, it's showing results in depression, people with addiction. Those are all good news. But why I still can't use it? It's still illegal. Um, how are
Mhm.
you seeing that challenge? How do you facing that challenge, and how can people deal with that better? And I guess how long do we are we looking at before it becomes legal?
Well, it is kind of frustrating, right? That we
Right.
have substances that humans have used for thousands of years that
Mhm.
were made illegal largely for racist and political reasons back in the
That's true.
70s, right?
Hmm.
It's important that people question the status quo, right? Like,
Yes, of course.
why were these drugs made illegal, right?
Mhm.
Why should the default state be we're afraid and it's illegal and drugs are bad?
Mhm.
And I'm just talking
Mhm.
about psychedelics here, right? Like,
Yes.
psychedelics have a completely different safety and dependency profile than
Yeah.
pretty much every other recreational drug that exists, right? They're shown to
Yes.
be safer than alcohol, safer than
Hmm.
cannabis, safer than
Hmm.
nicotine, certainly, like
Hmm.
safer than all these things. So we're just talking about psychedelics, but they were
Hmm.
caught up in the war on drugs, right?
Of course.
So it's
Yes.
important that people do question, why do we have the status quo? And I think when it's described to people, most people would think that the status quo doesn't make sense.
Absolutely.
That being said, these are very powerful drugs. And if we're going to use them to treat very serious conditions, we better be sure that they're safe, and we better be sure that they work, because we don't want to be advertising things falsely, right? And so for that reason, that's why we must do clinical trials. Just like, if you take a random dietary supplement like, say, ginger extract, right? And if you're going to claim that ginger extract cures cancer, you had better have done clinical studies that show that it's actually effective for the treatment of cancer, right?
Mhm.
But at the same time, people can go to the dietary supplement store and buy ginger extract that just says, maintains overall wellness or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
The difference with psychedelics is that no sort of like nutraceutical option exists because of the prohibition.
Yes. And that it adds to that frustration, right? Because there's all these other supplements out there, all claiming to, cure cancer, which is, something that really frustrates me. And you have these actual, substances that are giving real results that we are looking at. Um, what does the fight look like? Are we winning the war on this? Are we gonna get some legal, you know, um, legality into this? Are the clinical trials opening it much more now? And will it be available to the public? How is that likely going to happen?
Luckily, I think the tide is turning, right? And although there are probably more differences than there are similarities with the cannabis, what happened with cannabis, one of the things that did happen is many different states legalized cannabis. The sky hasn't fallen down, right? The world hasn't ended. And we're kind of seeing that same thing repeat with psychedelics. And so we already have two states that have legalized psychedelics, or psilocybin, at least in the case of Oregon. And in fact, Oregon already has the rules, and there is already legal sales happening in Oregon State right now. So it is happening. And so if people are frustrated, I would encourage them to get in touch with their local, local legalization of plant medicine alliance. Every state has one. Get a ballot measure together, and the people have power in this situation. And eventually we might hope to see some broader regulatory change, which would enable mass legalization of psychedelics for, just average people. When we're talking about approved drugs, however, the process will always stay the same, right? If we're talking about curing or treating depression or, the actual diagnosed conditions, that will always have to be approved as a drug. But luckily, the FDA, which is the organization that's responsible for reviewing and approving drugs, they do actually seem to be fairly on board with the idea of psychedelics as approved medicine.
Wow.
And I say that because they've given multiple psychedelics what's known as breakthrough therapy status, meaning that they are very promising, and they might treat conditions that are very hard to treat, or some other thing that basically means the FDA is giving you kind of like a little gold star as you go through the development process. So the FDA is kind of saying that we are certainly very open to receiving psychedelic drug applications.
That's great. You called it a gold star. I would have called it just a silver lining, but it is very positive. It's knowing that the FDA is actually pretty on board with this. It's also great, of course, like Oregon is also one of the first state that legalized cannabis, if I'm not mistaken. So go Oregon, right? What was the other state?
Colorado.
Colorado, of course, same. The other state that also first legalized cannabis. This is fantastic news. I believe for a lot of people, especially knowing that the current treatment of substance use disorders that we have right now, isn't perfect, right? But it's really the only one that we have, and this is something that resonates with me and resonates to a lot of families and friends that I know, and particularly, of course, to some of our audiences as well, in that the current treatment to not just substance use, but to mental health overall, the medication and the treatment being used for it, it has a lot of side effects, a lot. And it's unfortunate because it's the only thing that we have right now, and it's
Mhm.
great that there's research that's going into this. My question is kind of two pronged, but first is that what are the biggest significant impacts that you've seen by with the use of natural psychedelics over synthetic ones? And I mean, I'm sure that the FDA also is also on board with some of this synthetic treatments. But is there a particular difference? And are there any stories that you could probably share us that stands out in your memory?
We haven't done any direct comparison studies between our natural drugs
Right.
and synthetic drugs.
Okay.
Um, and the reason for that is quite simply that we are more concerned with demonstrating the efficacy of our own product in an indication
Mm-hmm.
rather than proving
Hmm.
whether it's better or worse than another
Right.
one, right?
Of
Like
course.
the
Of
goal
course.
of a drug is to get a product that you know works,
Hmm.
and get it approved.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so we haven't done any direct comparisons. However,
Right.
there
Hmm.
are people now that have taken both products, and there
Hmm.
are clinical trial sites that have given our
Hmm.
product and have also given synthetic product.
Wow.
And there
Wow.
are kind of vague anecdotal hints that the product may act differently in patients.
Wow.
In Canada, we have a program called the Health Canada Special Access Program,
Hmm.
and this is a program where people can request access to unauthorized drugs like psilocybin, for instance.
Hmm.
And there are people
Hmm.
in that program that have taken both synthetic and natural, and they report that they prefer natural. We've
Right.
heard from different clinical trial sites that our product, even though it's standardized to the same amount of psilocybin, um,
Hmm.
appears to have a faster onset time and
Hmm.
has a higher intensity and a shorter overall duration. But again,
Hmm.
it's you can't really draw any firm conclusions
Yeah,
because they weren't done in the exact same patient population
for sure.
in a controlled study. But it is very interesting to
Hmm.
see that there are probably some
Hmm.
differences.
That's actually very interesting. But of course, right? And a lot of this could be anecdotal as well, and a lot of it could be, just like um, it's so early on, right? It's so early on into this whole that even synthetic and natural is kind of just we're still figuring out what the true potential is and how
We
we
are.
can safely apply both in a clinical setting, which is so interesting, and hopefully that happens sooner than later. Ben, tell us a few stories. Any stories in particular that you saw like in an improvement, perhaps in the case of depression, in
Mhm.
the case of anxiety and addiction? We'd love to know that. Let us know.
A couple of cases come to mind.
Hmm.
The other day, I had a physician phone me up, and he had recently given our drug to a patient suffering from end of life distress in Canada.
Wow.
And this
Hmm.
is when people develop, fear, anxiety,
Right.
grief about
Hmm.
typically a terminal cancer diagnosis or something like that, and they
Yes.
really have trouble with their daily life in the face of this, very significant, challenge that they're
Hmm.
facing. And it's
Hmm.
it's not only them, but it's their family, it's their care
Yes.
team, it's everyone around them has
Yes.
a really tough a time of it. And the physician relayed his experience in administering this drug, and I had goosebumps simply from him saying, how impactful of an experience it was for everybody
Hmm.
in the room, for him,
Hmm.
for the patient, for the
Hmm.
family. You can
Hmm.
see people report like a visible kind of like
Hmm.
relief of this like
Hmm.
grief and guilt and
Hmm.
shame that people feel that they might be leaving their family members behind, or
Hmm.
guilt that they will
Hmm.
be leaving a burden, and then the 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 relationships with their family members being severely impacted. And so the fact that the physician took time out of his day to phone and say thank you for this drug, it's made a huge difference, and you could just feel the emotion and the passion in his voice, that was very, very impactful to me. um, Another story that comes to mind is a patient in one of our trials that was investigating alcohol use disorder. And
Mhm.
um, after the session, the patient inquired of the therapist, why were you guys holding me down? Like, why were you like holding me against my will? And the therapist said, well, actually, we weren't. And
Mhm.
as
Wow.
they further discussed, what had happened to the patient was that he was reliving a traumatic experience from his past. And that
Wow.
experience was that he had been held down while his girlfriend had been sexually assaulted in front of him while he
Oh
was being
wow.
held down.
Oh wow. Oh
And
wow.
because of that traumatic experience, he started abusing alcohol. And he had been abusing alcohol for decades
Wow.
until he did this psychedelic therapy with our natural drug.
Mhm.
And after that, he no longer felt the need to drink. So he, again, this is just one patient. This is completely
Mhm.
anecdotal story,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
it was the idea that by reliving this past traumatic experience,
Mhm.
uh, observing it objectively,
Mhm.
coming to terms with the fact that it wasn't his fault, that
Mhm.
he can release perhaps his guilt and his
Mhm.
shame and all these different things. And it was all of this kind of like bottled up trauma,
Yeah.
horrible experience that happened to him.
Mhm.
The easiest way, or the way that he dealt with it at the time, was to kind of like numb the pain with
Precisely.
alcohol. But now
Yeah.
that he can kind of figure out how to get rid of it a little bit, he doesn't feel the need to drink anymore. And that was just
Mhm.
that's a story that has stuck with me for sure, because this is someone who probably drank 10 to 20 drinks a day every day for the
Right.
last 40
Mhm.
years.
Mhm. Mhm. And these are great stories, and those are exactly the stories that I wanted our audience to hear and to be informed about, because these are real results. These are real life results that we are seeing. That seemingly hard, very difficult cases that even our current treatments and mental medications seem to not be able to you know um, to wrap our heads around. But then psychedelics is coming in, and they're actually bringing people to you know to face their own problems, their own
Yeah.
fears, and their own anxieties. And uh, yeah, I love that the audience knows that, and I think it's an important message to put out there. Then, what is the current focus of Filament Health? Um, of course, you are now currently, you mentioned natural psychedelics and your extraction of it. Um, Tell us a bit more about that. What is the product that most clinical trials are being used in clinical trials, and these treatment options in mental health and addiction?
Our main product is a product called PEX10. It is a
Mhm.
botanical drug standardized in psilocybin, which is extracted from the magic mushroom.
Mhm.
And our primary focus is to develop that drug for substance use disorders,
Mhm.
including opioid and stimulant use disorders.
Mhm.
We recently got the FDA to approve an IND that we opened
Wow.
for an opioid
Congratulations.
use disorder study.
Mhm.
And again, like you said, current treatments for substance use disorders are severely lacking, or in the case of
Mhm.
stimulant use disorder, non-existent. And so we think
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
psychedelics, especially psilocybin, may provide a very good treatment option, because there's
Mhm.
lots of now good research showing that psychedelics work for other areas of addiction. There
Right.
is research from the 70s where they studied LSD for opioid
Mhm.
addiction, and so it
Mhm.
does seem to be a very promising thing to to
Mhm.
to study. And obviously very, very large addressable markets,
Right.
large patient populations. And
Right.
for opioid use disorder, existing therapies are predominantly substitution therapy, right, where you
Right.
go on a different opioid, but a pharmaceutical grade,
Mhm.
longer half life opioid.
Wow. Okay. Right. So those are very important, and I think it gives an optimism, so to speak, Ben. It gives us this, like, hopefully in my case, hopefully it reaches us sooner than later, But right now we are in the infant stages of this movement. Um, uh, I'd like to give this opportunity right now to ask you, what are the future aspirations of Ben Lightburn of Filament Health? You did mention that you are continuing to develop this Pexten drug that you have, but what else are you seeing in the leading into the natural psychedelics industry, heading into the next 5 to 10 years? What role do you think filament play in shaping the future of natural psychedelic treatment?
Well, we're always going to be the champion of natural drugs. And so coming down the pipeline, in fact, we will have an ibogaine natural drug that is set to be distributed to clinics in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
We've also been working on drugs extracted from San Pedro cactus,
Mm-hmm.
standardized in mescaline. But
Mm-hmm.
we're also working on non-psychedelic botanical drugs as well. So
Okay.
we have a joint venture with a partner organization of ours called Jaguar Health. The joint venture
Mm-hmm.
is called Magdalena Bioscience. And this organization was set up to develop new botanical non-psychedelic drugs. And so
Right.
the first candidate is a widely known plant, which is known to be a stimulant. And so we are studying it as a potential treatment for ADHD, which of course, current therapies also are stimulants, but they're synthetic
Mm-hmm.
stimulants. And so we think that providing a natural one may have less potential for addiction and maybe more better tolerated by the patient population. We'll see.
Right. And Ben, this is a bit more just to add to all of that, and this is something that I of course learned from in your research, in your research with filament as well, and that um, just with like comparing it with setting into natural is that natural just has all these other substances that go with it that is probably more beneficial to us because again these are natural. We've been where it's designed to be consumed naturally, whereas synthetic is just focused, perhaps these natural options now and this natural psychedelic really is that is why we're seeing these options as more these treatment options, so to speak, as more kind of like a good option for other people. Ben, I'm so interested. I'm kind of rambling here because this is something that I am also, again, I resonate with. But I'd like to give you this opportunity, to let the audience know anything else that you would like them to know. Where can we connect with you? How do we find out more about Ben and Filament Health? And where can we find this product? And it's not available yet, of course.
So definitely our website has lots of good information. We regularly get featured in different newscasts. We were just featured recently on Canada's national TV news broadcast. So go to our website, look up our news section, sign up for our
Mhm.
mailing list. Our mailing list
Mhm.
will obviously keep you very informed about what's going on, and access the product. You can go look on clinicaltrials.gov for studies that we are
Mhm.
sponsoring or that we are involved in.
Mhm.
And that's where, you'll be able to sign up to go into a clinical trial. In Canada, obviously, people can request access to drugs via the special access program through their doctor. But yeah, hopefully sooner rather than later, we'll have approved filament drugs out on the market, and people
That's
might be able
fantastic.
to get a prescription to them.
Right. I'd just like to repeat that. Ben, the clinical.gov, what is that website?
Clinicaltrials.gov.
All right, clinicaltrials.gov for all our audiences and listeners out there. The website is also filament.health. Ben, am I correct? And again, Ben, thank you so much for your time. Are you on any socials? Are you most active? Where can we connect with you?
Probably the company is more active than I am, probably. So again, just go to the company, Filament Health, connect to all our social channels with Filament.
All right, fantastic. Ben, thank you so much for your wisdom. I am optimistic that there is a leader and a voice like you in this kind of field. And, for all our listeners and audiences out there, make sure to check that out. And we'll see you guys on the next one.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Ben.
Bye.
Wow. Okay. What do you think about that?
All right, so here's the thing. We try to get a little bit better every day, but we can't do it without you. So if you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe below. And if you have any comments, just leave them in the space under.